for a while.
I know, I'm not bad, thank you. Happy Sunday evening to you.
And to you. Let's make a toast to our fourth show.
Our fourth show and a great week ahead.
Yes. What are you drinking?
I am drinking, for me, this is Canada in a glass. This is a Weiser's 19-year-old seasoned oak. It's, what is it? It's a barrel. I think the barrels are left out to the elements for 48 months, and then the whiskey is aged in them. And so for me, it's got this aroma of a campfire on a wet morning, or like a walk in the woods in Algonquin. I love it. For me, it's a nostalgia thing as well. So I appreciate this. This is my Canada.
And I'm drinking some of Canada also, Weiser's, 42-year-old, which I was fortunate enough to get as a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And to be frank, I can't even describe the taste. It's so complex and lush that I'm just going to say, here's to a good week. Here's to Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Cheers. God bless whiskey.
Yeah. Right.
So tell me, what's going on in the world? In restaurants and travel, what's going on with you?
A lot is going on. As far as restaurants are concerned, it's very interesting that every week there can be 4 or 5 restaurants that are closing and 4 or 5 restaurants that are opening. It seems that the more expensive restaurants, contrary to popular belief, are full and not having a hard time, like the Michelin star restaurants, for example. But the medium and lower-ish priced restaurants are having a hard time. I think it's because the people who would frequent the less expensive restaurants just can't afford it. But the people who can afford the top expensive restaurants are still okay.
Well, also those Michelin restaurants, some of them at least, can afford to charge more.
Yes.
For the majority of restaurants, the profit margins are narrower and narrower, and that makes it very difficult to stay open.
Yeah.
So it is a tough time. We need to support our restaurants.
Well, I'm trying.
I know. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you something. We have been talking about travel, and over the past week or so, since this trade war has really taken off, there are people who are disavowing the U.S. and not traveling. And I think there was I don't know how many thousands of people canceled their trips to Florida, for example. And I'm wondering what you think about that.
Well, it's interesting that while people are canceling trips to the U.S., like for spring break coming up and for Easter and so on, they are still traveling, and they are going to Mexico. Mexico's rates of Canadians traveling are up, and the Caribbean cruises. People are finding other places, and people are traveling within Canada, which is very interesting. And it's also very interesting because in our magazine, you have written so much about the fabulous places to travel in Ontario that nobody really talks about. And it's amazing what is going on in our own backyard.
Well, I think that, for me at least, I travel for experiences. It's not like when I was a kid, we would go to Florida because it was warm and an enjoyable climate. Now it's all about the experience that happens to be somewhere. And there are some incredible experiences right here in Ontario, and especially as it warms up, I take my son to Tillsonburg, and that's the largest motocross track in North America. In Elora, They've got incredible climbing. Thunder Bay is like the mecca of climbing in Canada, at least. So we've got so much going on here that it is a magnet for international tourists. So to make it more evident for local tourism is really key.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I also have a different take on things. I was just invited by one of our American cousins to see Dead & Co., which is the latest iteration of the Grateful Dead, at the Sphere in Las Vegas. And how could I possibly say no to that? I have a different take on this. One of our American cousins invited me to see Dead & Co., which is the latest iteration of the Grateful Dead,
Wow.
at the Sphere in Las Vegas. And how could I possibly say no to that? I'm not at war with our cousin. I'm not in a trade war with Americans. Our countries are going through something ridiculous. But to see the Dead or to see any concert at the Sphere in Las Vegas is an incredible opportunity. So I fly out Wednesday night. I'm going to the show on Thursday, and then I come back on Friday. But there are just so many incredible experiences to be had, and this stupid trade war has to end soon, because it's just ridiculous that we should be talking like this and not traveling to the States. Or it's great that we're promoting travel in Canada. That's something that's important to us both. But I'm looking forward to seeing the Dead.
Well, you have been going to the Dead concerts since you were a teenager.
Yes.
Have they changed their program? Do they write new songs? Because if not, you know them all by memory. You can sing along. You can join them on the stage.
So it's not about, I think it is, the first time I saw them, I felt this is unlike any other band. It's not like going to see Aerosmith or Journey. You're not watching a band. When you go to a Dead show, you're part of the band. They're the house band for an experience that's going on outside the venue, inside the venue, afterwards. And there is such, it's like a religious experience. There's such a sense of community. And yeah, I know all the songs, but every night there's a certain kind of, it's improvisational, like jazz. So you never know what they're going to do. They could do the same song 1,000 times and it would never be the same way twice. Each show is its own unique experience, and certainly seeing it at a different venue like the Sphere is going to be a different kind of experience. And there have been shows where they've played for hours and hours where most bands would stop after 2. They're just at intermission.
When did they start? In the 70s?
65.
65.
Yeah. But it's funny because I've been seeing their final tour for the past 30 years. You know, I saw them when they were called the Other Ones after Jerry Garcia passed. And, this is the first time I've seen Dead & Co. Because other times when I've had an opportunity, for whatever reason, I couldn't go. But I really feel this might be the last time.
Well, have a great time.
Yeah. And if it's not the last time, I might have to go again.
Well, let's talk about our guests.
Well, no, before we do that, we got to talk about you, because now is the time. We can't leave this to the end. Now is the time for our Sara Says, which I'm really looking forward to.
Here we go. You're at a restaurant and you've been asked to taste the wine. Not everyone has a palate for this kind of thing. So here's the simplest way to assess the wine. After you look at it, you smell it before you swirl, because swirling can mask many of the imperfections. The nose is the most important part of assessing the wine, because when you smell it, you can find 75 to 80% of the imperfections just by the nose. You didn't know that. Now, put your nose right in and take a deep sniff. It smells nice. But if it smells a little odd, it's just like food. If it doesn't smell good, you don't even have to bother swirling and tasting. But if it smells good, it's going to taste great. Cheers.
Okay. What do you think of that? So why don't you tell us about our first guest?
Okay. Meet Dave Mitton.
Okay.
He has such an extensive biography. He's done so much that I have had to write it down, and I'm going to read some of the finer points.
Okay.
So Dave Mitton was born and raised on a dairy farm in New Brunswick. Dave's parents encouraged him to travel the world when he was young, and this he did, hitting almost all the continents, all the while picking up jobs in a bar, restaurant, and drinks industry. In 2001, Dave was ready and hit the Toronto restaurant and bar scene with a personal mission to put Toronto on the world's drinking map, along with New York, Mexico City, etc. With a friend, he opened Chahosky, which is another story of a restaurant, and it was a 4-story restaurant and bar and funhouse with music and so on, and it lasted about 10 years. And then he joined the renowned Corey Vitello at the Harbord Room. It was a lipstick pink hottest ticket in town, where Dave's cocktails were as big a draw as the kitchen. The Canadian Professional Bartenders Association had eyes on him and appointed him the president of the Ontario chapter. So Dave worked with many spirits brands, and about 10 years ago, he joined forces with Corby Spirit and Wine / Pernod Ricard brands. And they own some of the most iconic Canadian whiskey around, including Wiser's.
Yes.
Dave is modest, but I will tell you that he has won every single international award that there is. And in 2024, he was named Best International Brand Ambassador and Best Brand Ambassador.
Wow.
So that's really something high up in that industry. And here he is with us, and we're going to have a nice chat.
Hi, Sara and Adam. Well, I'm just here blushing from that introduction. Thank you very much, Sara. That was very kind of you.
What is a brand ambassador, and how do I get to be one? I think everyone would love to be a brand ambassador.
It's a great question. I mean, I get asked it at the airport, usually once or twice a week. It's pretty made up, global brand ambassador. It's kind of what you think it would be. I head up all the education and advocacy on our brands. So when Corby Spirit and Wine approached me 10 years ago, J.P. Wiser's had been around since the late 1850s. It was a well-known whiskey brand here in Canada. We were looking to launch it along with some of our other brands in the U.S. and overseas. And the Canadian whiskey category itself was a little misunderstood. So basically, we made up the position. I was fortunate enough to create my role. And it was going to be for a year or two. And here I am a decade later. I've just fallen in love with the challenge. But basically, I travel wherever we're sold. And sales teams will get bottles behind bars, onto shelves at spirit stores, into the hands of spirit experts. And basically, I have to come in afterwards and I have to engage and excite them about the category of Canadian whiskey and specifically our brands.
So what about when you're in countries that are known for whiskey, like Scotland or Japan? Do you travel there and try to sell Canadian whiskey there?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the UK is one of the better markets for us for one of our brands, Lot 40. It's 100% rye whiskey. And it does so well there because it is unique. It's not going to take over sales of Scotch in Scotland or Irish whiskey in Ireland, but it's become very well respected. And Canadian whiskey is becoming more and more regarded as a premium whiskey over the years. We've been around since the mid 1800s, but haven't always been considered a fun whiskey like bourbon, or an exotic whiskey like Japanese whiskey, or a premium whiskey like Scotch. But the last 10 years or so, there's a lot of companies that have been raising the bar, and a lot of great spirit writers, whiskey writers embracing our national spirit. And we've been going up and up and up, and I hope that's going to continue.
And do people know Canadian whiskey as rye whiskey?
Well, I mean, you ain't get into a deep one on that. Like, if you think of Scotland has 5 categories of whiskey. Okay. Ireland has 4. United States of America has over 37.
What?
Canada has 1.
Oh.
So we are Canadian whiskey. We make it in quite a unique way where all of our grains are kept separate from the moment they show up at our distillery through production to the end, where we have, this is why Canada has master blenders. So all of our grains are fermented, distilled, and aged all in different ways, different types of casks. And then our master blender will create blends and expressions of whiskey.
So is that the substantive difference between Canadian whiskey and, let's say, bourbon, that everything is fermented separately and then blended at the end?
Yeah. So bourbon, like you say, out of the 37 categories in America, I think it's safe to say bourbon's probably the most popular. Mm-hmm. And bourbon, you say the distiller, he, she, or they're going to make the recipe as its grains. They'll put everything together. Yeah. They'll ferment that together. They'll distill it together. They'll age it together, and they put out a beautiful product. So yes, Canada is almost opposite, where corn, rye, wheat, and barley come into our distillery in Windsor, Ontario, and all of it's produced separately. So it can be distilled in different ways to concentrate up flavors or take them away. The different types of casks will accentuate different flavors, different amounts of time. Our terroir is a very big deal. We have to age a minimum of 3 years to be called a Canadian whiskey. Sara, I heard, is drinking our oldest on the market right now, the 42-year-old. Very nice to hear that. Thank you. And our master blender can take all of these separate distillates and create all these beautiful expressions of whiskey.
That's amazing.
You know, yeah. I want to tell you something. I grew up in Winnipeg, where whiskey was whiskey. You know, it's one thing.
Yep.
And when my dad was in his 80s and he was retired, and, you know, he had his minor disabilities, and he came to live with us. And every morning after breakfast, he filled up a water glass with whiskey. And I used to buy him the best that I could. And he would sip all day, just sip. And by dinner, he was in such a great mood. And then after dinner, he'd go to bed. So that was his like enjoyment, to have a glass of whiskey just there for him, because he always drank whiskey, as all his friends did when they came to our house. You know, when people used to entertain at home in those days, there would be a few bottles of whiskey. There was no scotch or vodka or gin or something like that. In Winnipeg, it was Canadian whiskey.
Absolutely. And I think it's still safe to say, you look at sales across Canada, I mean, Ontario, the prairies, the Alberta, like Canadian whiskey is very large there. I mean, it's large everywhere. In Maritimes, where I grew up, it might be a little more rum forward, might be a little more wine forward in Quebec, maybe even gin forward in British Columbia. But Canadian whiskey, it still outsells everything here. It's a lot of national pride, I think, especially these days.
I have a couple of statistics for you that of all the whiskey that's produced in Canada, 15% is consumed in Canada. 85% of Canadian whiskey is exported and consumed internationally. And the sales of Canadian whiskey contribute almost $6 billion to the Canadian economy. And I don't think people know, I don't think it's general knowledge, how integral the whiskey industry was to the foundation and formation of Canada.
100%.
Yeah,
You look at
whiskey and fur.
the first 5 taxpayers in Canada, and we didn't pay taxes for 10 years after we'd become a country in 1867. But the first 5 taxpayers were Canadian whiskey producers. The first taxpayers were the Gooderham and Worts distillery in downtown Toronto. The first year they paid taxes, they had to pay out $1.5 million.
Oh, my goodness.
Back in the mid 1800s, late 1800s. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
You look at Gooderham and Worts, for all of us that live in Toronto, they were the starting of building our railroads locally. They built some of our most important red brick buildings, our churches, Little Trinity Church, the Flatiron building in Toronto. That's Gooderham and Worts. Most people, we don't learn it in school growing up, but Gooderham and Worts had so much to do with building our city and our country. They were on our currency at one point.
Really?
Gooderham was one of Toronto's mayors at one point. Like, the Gooderham and Worts had so much to do with the building of Toronto, and that's Canadian whiskey.
There should be a course, or at least a chapter of a book in Canadian history in high school about whiskey, because it really is the spirit of Canada. And I don't know if it was Gooderham Worts or Hiram Walker that contributed to John A. Macdonald's campaign, and then Wilfrid Laurier's campaign. So they were vital, within Canadian politics as well.
Absolutely. Henry Corby was a politician for a while. Like you say, you name some of the original producers of Canadian whiskey, and they had their hands in everything. Like they were making whiskey before we were actually a country.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they had a lot to do with building and forming of the country. Think of it this way. Our distillery currently has 1.6 million barrels laying down at all times. And those are worth $1,000 in tax each to the Canadian government.
Wow. Are you doing, is there anything new on the horizon? Like I know with Wiser's, there's often something new. Like what I'm drinking was new when I first bought it, but I'm still clinging to it. And I think it's interesting whenever the blender comes up with, a different cask or a different essence.
There will be, 100%. And Dr. Don, he's our master blender, Don Livermore. He's actually has his PhD in brewing and distilling out of Harriet Watt in Edinburgh. So he actually is a doctor. It's not just a little nickname. Bless you. So, last year there was a focus on more age statements with the 42-year-old that Sarah's drinking. We did a 28-year-old and some other variations going down to the U.S. What I'm able to say right now is this coming year, before the end of this year and next year, you're going to see some really fun barrel finishes coming from some JP Wisers and some of our Lot 40. There's some pretty interesting stuff coming out that I've been fortunate enough to try, but I don't think I'm allowed to say it out loud what will be coming as of yet, because spirit, like LCBOs, SAQs, it's a whole procedure. You have to go through the red tape. They have to accept it, and then it's on shelves. I think it's all done, but JP Wisers has some fun stuff coming out this year. Let's put it that way. Some really
things. What's always really fun is the tours. I went on a tour. I drove out to Windsor, and I had a lot of fun touring the distillery there and trying different samples. That's I think it's a signature Ontario experience, or at least it's one that should be.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, most people don't even realize. Like you say, we've been there. Hiram Walker was an actual gentleman from the city of Detroit. He was a grocer that rumors of civil war and prohibition in the USA. He wanted to open his own distillery, but he wasn't going to do it in the US with the possibility of civil war breaking out and people not being allowed to buy whiskey.
Yeah.
So he built the distillery across the river in Canada. He was the first commuter. And we've been producing whiskey there since 1857. And most people don't realize what's unique about it is, I won't say we are but we are probably top 3 of largest distilleries in North America.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say by square footage we are. So it is a big industrial plant, but there's a smaller, more artisanal side to it as well.
Yeah.
With some of our smaller brands that we make, but it's quite an impressive sight to see.
But how brilliant is that? You know, you live in Detroit, you know what's coming, you know that you can't open up a distillery there, so you just go across the river and become Canadian.
Just that simple. Like, times were a lot different back then.
So what's happening now? Do the tariffs and this whole trade war, does this benefit Canadian whiskey, or is it hurting it? What's your view on that?
Well, I think this is going to hurt everybody in the long run. But I mean, it's simple math right now where most provinces aren't selling American whiskey. Canadian whiskey sales are definitely going up.
Yeah. And is Canadian whiskey, is it different than Canadian wines where you can't really get BC wines in Ontario or vice versa? But with Canadian whiskey, I think, is there a different standard that you can have cross-provincial trade of whiskey?
If you think of like the big eight distilleries, all the big brand names we know, those are readily available across the country.
Yeah.
And then if you pick up some books like Spirits of Canada by Christine Sisimondo or Stephen Beaumont, or the Distillery Guide by Davin Kergamo and Blair Phillips, it'll show they've reviewed maybe close to the 300 artisanal boutique distilleries across the country.
Yeah, Davin is amazing. He's an encyclopedia of whiskey, and he's written for us.
Yeah, he's always been there for me. He's been a great guy since I started this role over the last decade. And unfortunately, I think it's almost the amount that these distilleries produce that is why they're not leaving their provinces. For instance, it's kind of like wines in Ontario or British Columbia, there's not always enough to go around to spread out.
Yeah. Well, certainly with BC wines, they sell out in the Vancouver restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, there are some smaller distilleries that are across the country, or there would be some really boutique niche ones that I've had the pleasure of trying their whiskey, and they'll even usually be sold out in their own province because they don't make that much and it just goes overnight.
Wow.
You know, I have a neighbor in my building, and he was going home to Pakistan for Christmas.
Oh.
And he said to me, "What should I take as a gift?" I said, "Take Canadian whiskey." And I had a new bottle of Lot 40.
Great.
And that was a big hit in Pakistan, I have to tell you.
Oh, that's so great to hear. Yeah, that big 100% rye we noticed we're not everywhere yet. We're probably in 20 different countries, but kind of overseas markets are really enjoying that big, bold rye compared to the softer corn.
Mm-hmm. I was looking for that Lot 40.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Went to Pakistan.
That's all right.
Luckily, there's plenty of it. You'll always be able to find it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what would you say, what about cocktail pairing? You know, sometimes it seems that cocktails are becoming much more fruit forward. And I don't know how accommodating whiskey is compared to the lighter spirits like a vodka or a gin. How would you, I mean, you obviously are the one to ask about whiskey and cocktails.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can think of it this way, like from the style of whiskey I mean, all the flavors from being concentrated up or taken away from the way you distill, from the grain of the yeast, to the type of barrel it's being finished in. You know, if you've got something like our JP Weiser's 10-year-old, that's going to be that soft, rich corn, more lean, but you get the baking spices of the rye added into it. That's something you're going to do more kind of tall and refreshing drinks. Like it could be as simple as a highball, or a lot of people like it with a Boilermaker in the summertime with the nice local beer. You'll see it paired up in the fall months with like apples, like apple cider mixed into it. You think of that kind of fall flavors. Or like I say, the Lot 40 you were just talking about, that big 100% rye. You're not going to do much better when it's making an old fashioned or a Manhattan with that straight rye whiskey. But this is the one we see bartenders playing around with. I was at Simple Things for brunch today, and Evelyn, the owner, who does some of the best cocktails in the city, was talking about maybe doing something with rhubarb and the 40, because all those baking spices, and there's rich mint notes to it and florals. There's an elegance and delicate side to it that you'll see a lot of bartenders mixing with sherries and citrus and bubbles and making seasonal drinks with it. So it's quite versatile, to be honest.
You have to send me some recipes just for fun.
Oh, absolutely, I will. Fun ones to make at home.
Yeah.
And what about food pairings?
Great question. I mean, food pairing is always a little tougher. I did a whiskey dinner at True Wild Distilling 3 weeks ago in Calgary, and we had a lot of fun with it. The team there put out some incredible dishes. We brought in some of our whiskeys from the distillery. I mean, you could think of it like a lot of our whiskeys will really go well with seafood. And you think of it too, like a lot of people will use some of our like our Lot 40 dark oak to go with oysters. And I know with oysters, you'll think Scotch a lot of the time, or vodkas, but it works really well. I mean, heavy, hearty meat is something that just comes across, but also desserts. Like when I'm in the UK, someone's always making me a Lot 40 something to go with sticky toffee pudding.
Yeah.
And I'm never disappointed.
That's how I'm familiar with it is, with desserts or, in cooking, a splash of something, especially if there's something with brown sugar seems to pair well with it. But I think, Mom, you've used it sometimes with steak.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I'm making a fillet in an iron pan, and I put on the pepper, and then just to finish, some Lot 40.
I love that.
And then just for a few seconds, and then into the plate. It's good.
I love that. Well, our master blender would like that because he always talks about the circle of life with Lot 40, where farmers in Ontario grow all the grain for us. We buy the grain from them. We produce whiskey with it. When we're done making the whiskey, it's full of all kinds of proteins, so we sell it back to the farmers as feed for their livestock. So it really is a full circle of life. Great for business, very good sustainable practice.
Happy cows.
Happy cows,
Yeah.
exactly. So Don always thinks, if you see Don having a steak and a whiskey, he'll talk about the circle of life of how that whiskey could have been made from the grains that fed this cow, and it's pretty interesting.
So, Dave, we just have a couple minutes left, but I want to ask you, what's next for you and what's next for Wiser's? What can we look forward to on the horizon?
For myself, there's a few things on the horizon that I hope I'll be able to share in the next half a year or so. Working on some personal projects outside of this. I love this role, though, and I don't ever want to leave it. I think the next thing is we're seeing Canadian whiskey really start to grow. It's been doing well for us in the US and Europe, and we're starting to see people from more countries in South America or Asia reach out to us because they're interested in bringing in Canadian whiskey and selling it.
Oh,
So there is a want and need. I don't know how much, because if a market reaches out to us, we'll hear them out, hear their plans to sell us. But we're starting to branch out. You know, Canadian whiskey is starting to get a lot more respect and excitement around the category. So I'm
And
hoping
so
the
is
next few
Canada.
years.
and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I really like bourbon. And bourbon can be quite a dynamic whiskey, but with Canadian whiskey, there's such a range. It's such a versatile product that even just at Wiser's alone, you have quite a portfolio of different kinds of whiskeys to appeal to different palates. So that in itself is something to be proud of, that a taste of Canada in each bottle could be completely different, which is also truly reflective of our country.
Yep. Very diverse. I like that. That's great. Yeah, I couldn't agree more or put it better myself.
All right. Well, maybe I could be your brand ambassador sidekick.
We'll definitely have some drinks together. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate your time, and I'm wishing you all the best with all your endeavors coming up.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me. It was a blast. And Sarah, I'm going to send you some cocktail recipes to enjoy at home.
Thank
And
you.
I will hold you to that, Mom. You're going to make them for me.
I will.
All right.
Have a great evening. We'll
You
talk
too.
to you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Very interesting. I think whiskey is such an interesting subject. So good choice on that, Mom. Now, I want to introduce you to someone else, someone who is near and dear to both of us, a gentleman by the name of Patrick McMurray, who also started in restaurants when he was about 16, but he continued in his education and academics, as well as his curiosity about cuisines of the world. And with a degree in kinesiology, he shucked his way into our hearts. And eventually, I think it was in 2002, in Ireland, he became the world champion oyster opener, the only Canadian to win the most illustrious shucking contest in over 60 years at that point. He also holds 3 Guinness Book World Records for shucking oysters, 39 in 1 minute. 39 oysters he shucked in 1 minute. He was part of Team Canada. They shucked 8,840 oysters in 1 hour. And I think that's pretty extraordinary. He also is an inventor. He invented the world famous pistol grip oyster knife and a new shucking technique. And I think you have one with you. Do you?
Yes, I do.
Let me see that. Oh, okay. And so he also is an author. He wrote The Oyster Companion in 2018, which is everything you need to know but might have been afraid to ask about oysters. He's a restaurateur. He's a teacher. He's also an oyster sommelier. I don't even know what that means, so I want to ask him about that. But he is here with us right now, Patrick McMurray.
All right, let's go.
Okay.
Nice.
All right, sir, you want to take this outside? Let's go. How are you? It's so good to see you again, Miss Sara and Adam. It's great seeing you. Thank you very much for having me here.
Good seeing you too. But tell me, what is an oyster sommelier?
It's such an interesting story. Thank you for that. There's been a lot of people using it in the past number of years as a concept. How much do you know about oysters, or how do you help describe this? Who is the person in charge that can talk about this, and what would their title be? In the world of beer, it's a cicerone.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, in wine, it is a wine terminology to use the word sommelier. And we wanted to create something that showcases the level of knowledge that's required to create a global knowledge about oysters, because oysters are around everywhere, wherever ocean touches land. Most people would know just 1 or 2 different types. We have 5 different species in North America. With the Maritimes Canada alone, you've probably got over 100 to 120 different brands within one species of oyster. And then you've got the West Coast, which has got 30 or 40 different brands or more. And and then you go through the States. So if you gather that knowledge and you try to explain this to people, a long time ago, and it was actually sort of suggested to me by a client once. This is back at the beginning of Starfish, and they asked the difference. What's the difference between like an East Coast oyster and a West Coast oyster? And I said, well, an East Coast oyster, generally speaking, is salty sweet. And a West Coast oyster comes off with ocean sea salt, sweet cream, melon, and cucumber. And they're like, it sounds like you're talking about like a sommelier. You're talking about wine. I go, well, if you take all the sauce, all the lemon off, take the oyster, slide it in, 2-bite chew, and then aerate like a sommelier tells you to. And that's not because they're wine people doing that. It's because that's how your olfactory system works with your palate. And it's a physiological thing. To understand that, that's how you get to know the flavor of any food. And it really works well with oyster as well. So once I started telling them that, they got this confusion. Then they tried it and they're like, but that's exactly what it's in. So in the long answer to this is that there's a sommelier who understands. An oyster sommelier would be someone who understands the oyster menu at a restaurant or a bar or hotel, help clients and customers to understand what oysters to choose from what they like, what to pair them with, whether it's wine, beer, whiskey per se, or other spirits or cocktails. And they can help run a program. So we're developing, we as this group I've created with my partner Julie, Oyster Master Guild, to help educate and teach people, train them up to the level of a sommelier, of that level of knowledge, because this is an apprenticed thing. Oysters and oyster shucking. We learn to this point. We learn from those people who have taught us wherever you start working. And if you work in a place where they actually like oysters, you're going to get better than if you work in a place like, you got to shuck oysters. You're shucking oysters. So it depends on the restaurant that you're at. So we've decided to work this way and sort of help and teach people about the world of oyster.
I was at the Brock Environmental Center in Virginia Beach. Oh, what is this book?
That's my original. Consider the Oysters the OG. That's the first rendition from 2006, and then we updated in 2018 with this one.
And it's beautiful.
Thank you.
The photographs are wonderful.
I did most of the pictures in that one. As you travel around and you pick up the pictures, thank you very much. So I threw those into the publisher as well.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So, I was at the Brock Environmental Center in, I think it was in Virginia Beach, and there was this whole education about oysters because, as you know, there's the Virginia Oyster Trail. And what I became aware of then was how important they are to the environment, that, each oyster acts like a filter. And so kind of reclaiming the Chesapeake Bay and that kind of rugged coastline, it's been really helpful to replenish the ecosystem by introducing more oysters, because they have a keystone role.
Exactly.
Enable all these aquatic sanctuaries along their reefs.
Being a keystone species, that's what helps build the environment. If you put an oyster farm in, the oyster is a filter feeder. Now, consumers worry about that. It's not like they're a furnace filter and they filter stop everything. They're selective of what they want to eat. Oysters would like to eat phytoplankton and zooplankton. So that's just the microscopic organisms that are around. And that's what they would normally like to eat. And once they clear that out of the system, then there's more light that gets down to the substrate and more plant life can grow. And then animals and fish and everything all come in as well and create that wonderful little environment. They also, because of the hard shell on them, they sequester carbon out of the ocean, out of the atmosphere into the ocean, out of the ocean into the shell to create and build that shell, and it becomes a sink, carbon sink. So when you open up your oyster and you keep it, you can compost it here in Ontario or Toronto, or if you're landlocked, you can do stuff there. On the coastline, they generally season it for a year and then put it back into the ocean to help rebuild that substrate, so that it becomes that ocean circle, when it comes down to it.
Well, you're someone, you're involved in I don't remember the name of the agency. It's Secord.
Oh, Secor is a wholesaler in Toronto. Yep,
Yeah.
I'm involved with them. Yeah.
Well, like in consulting, like what time, which season is appropriate for certain oysters? Because I
Yeah.
think, and that's so important because people don't think of seafood in terms of season as much as they should.
They'll wonder. Sometimes they'll say, "I had an oyster and it tastes great." 6 months later, it tastes different.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it's not a sandwich. You're not going to make it taste the same all the way along. These oysters here that I have, we're showcasing a lot of East Coast oysters. These ones are what we call a winter oyster right now. They've endured the winter of the maritime Canada. They're under 6 feet of ice. So anywhere from December until March, if you get good Canadian maritime oysters, generally speaking, most of the growers have cut through the ice and hauled it up and then bring it to the distribution center, pack it up, and away you go. Well, with the ice, that freezes off a lot of the fresh water, and it sort of concentrates the salt water. So these ones have a very deep, big, bold, briny flavor. Some of them out of Cascapec Bay have got a sort of very neat earthiness to it, very mushroom and umami. Others are steely clean versus sweet, sugar sweet in the finish of it. So they all change, and it will change through the seasons. The same oyster will change based on what's happening because we don't always have ice. So the ice goes, you got the spring, then you got a summer, then you got a fall, then you got a winter. You got 4 different seasons on oysters. Back in the pandemic, I was actually, the silver lining. I had barstool oysters in from Prince Edward Island and said, just ship me them all the time. And I was able over a year to take pictures of them throughout their change. And I go, great, this is my thing that I can do and showcase this.
Is the harvest of oysters in PEI, is that the way it's done there? Is that the way it's done everywhere, or do different regions, different countries have a different process for how they harvest?
Great question. Many different ways of harvesting oysters and growing oysters. Really, it originated in ancient China, one of the earliest forms of farming, and then it developed into Roman era. The Romans really kind of developed the way that we kind of do it now, where they've got bags and floats, and then they transfer to different stations. The Europeans learned about that. Then that knowledge also came over here, where First Nations were gardening for tens of thousands of years, where they would collect oysters and then put them in an area where it's easier to get to, and then they could harvest them up. So each region will do something different at contemporary oystering. Tide tumbling, whether you're doing sort of more of a intensive or style of farming, or extensive style of farming, where you're going to allow Mother Nature to do more of the work, and you're raking them up, you're seeing the oysters. We have this sort of a wild fishery in Prince Edward Island where you can take spring harvest in public beds and move them to your bed to finish for the season. And then you can rake them up and bring them. They're all going to be grown on bottom, as most oysters will do that. But then we've also got grape farming. If you want to get an oyster to look like this each and every time, you have to farm that. And it's unlike fish farming. We do not feed the oysters. That's, again, Mother Nature with the phytoplankton. The farmer uses different techniques to shape the shells. And if it's a well-shaped shell, well farmed, it'll be easier to open. So if it's easier to open, then more people will enjoy it. Hopefully.
Okay.
I was in British Columbia, and a man took us out on a boat. The water was clear as if it was a swimming pool. And at the bottom were millions and millions of little oysters.
Yeah.
And this was his waters, and he was growing the oysters, and the kind of oysters they were baking oysters. You put them on a barbecue and they opened them. They looked like rocks. You didn't, if you saw a couple of them just lying on the garden or something, you wouldn't think that they were the oysters that we know.
Is that a Japanese thing?
He was like John Wayne.
Oh, okay.
He was really a character.
Well, because I've experienced that in Japan, where they
baking oysters.
Yes, where they don't harvest them as often or as quickly as we do here. So they let them grow a lot longer and larger, and then they barbecue them or they smoke them.
Yeah. If you want to cook an oyster, you need something a little bit bigger that holds up to the heat. It doesn't shrink as much.
Oh, okay.
Our East Coast oysters are great on the half shell, but little cocktails are just too small. They'll just shrivel right up. The West Coast, as you saw, Sarah, a lot of times they'll have beach oysters or big honkers. I love the way they call them baking oysters. And just like a baking potato, nice large thing.
Mhm.
And when you open it up, you've got a lot of meat, and you can put sauce or whatever you want onto it, and it works really well.
The ones I like best in Canada are the Malpecs, and
Yes.
in the U.S.,
Rappahannock.
Rappahannock.
Rappa-
Rappahannock's out of Virginia.
Oh,
I love
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah. Delish.
Rappahannocks are my favorite. But when I was in Japan, do you remember years ago I went and I wrote about Mikimoto pearls, Mom?
Yes.
And so there are these women called ama divers, and some of them are in their 80s. They swim out to the bay, and they each have a bucket, and they dive down, they collect the seafood, put them back in the bucket, and swim back. And so we would have all different kinds of seafood, but they're now somehow, at least from a tourism perspective, affiliated with Mikimoto pearls. And I just became so interested in those oysters at the time. So I got to stay with someone who, he had his, would you call it a hatchery?
You would. It would be
Yeah.
hatchery grows the little baby ones. So is that where you're thinking about
Well,
it, or is
so
this the
in
pearls?
No, for the oysters. So in the bay, he had all these skids,
Yep.
and everything was so clean. Like he and his family used toothbrushes to
Yep.
everything immaculate. And the oysters were unbelievable.
Super. Yeah, that'd be an oyster farm.
Yeah, Oyster Farm,
Yep.
of course. Yeah.
I was at Canoe, the restaurant. Years
Yes.
ago, I had just come back from Japan, and I met two of my girlfriends. I had brought them gifts, and we ordered oysters. And in my oyster at Canoe in Toronto, there were 3 little pearls,
Wow.
and I
That's
still have them.
That's a good number. I have it's rare that you find 3. You can find one once in a while. Best I've found is 33 in one out of New York. But that was because I know Canoe and I know their list. That's probably coming out of Prince Edward Island, and I would hazard a guess that was a Caskenpeck Bay oyster. They, for some reason, out of Prince Edward Island, Caskenpeck Bay oysters, you'll find pearls more often than not. And I don't know why it is. And I told the growers that. I'm like, as if I'm watching Instagram and all that type of stuff, I can see people popping pearls out of their oysters. It's kind of interesting because you never know if there's one in there.
Well, I felt it.
Yeah.
And I thought it was something that came from my tooth.
Yep.
And then there were 3 of them. I was so excited. I told the waiter, and he didn't believe me. He said, "Oh, come on."
He's probably good that he didn't charge you for the pearls. That's $9,000.
So we're talking about Canadian oysters. Are there certain that we know about the Malpec oysters? Are there certain that you're promoting or that more people should be aware of in terms of like all the? I'm sure there's a quite a vast number of Canadian oysters, but are there a few that we should be looking out for?
There's a myriad of oysters that you can get, and some of the rare and wonderful ones that you don't normally see. And it depends on the palate of what region you're at. In Toronto, they're predominantly an East Coast palated city. Montreal is a little bit more European in its thoughts, so they can get a little bit more West Coast and then maritime as well. British Columbia oysters, absolutely love them. Effingham Bay oyster is as far west as you can get in Canada. It's off the Pacific coast side of Vancouver Island. So that is a brilliant oyster that you should look into or look for, which are fantastic. And you can get them in small, petite sizes. They don't have all oysters don't always come into the large size. They can get that way, but a lot of times they'll bring them out in the smaller cocktail size. I've had Max and Fenny Bay. Fenny Bay has something called the Sunseeker. The Sunseeker oyster is a tide-tumbled oyster, which means that the tide comes and goes and really allows it to tumble a lot. The stress on that shell causes the cap to be as cupped as the bottom, and you get this lovely little pillow of oceany goodness within the shell that just makes my eyes water. So that's something to find as well.
Where is Fanny Bay from?
Fanny Bay, Comox. They're from the Comox region of British Columbia, so they're the inside. They're on the Sunshine Coast type of thing is where they come from, and they have a secret code. They won't tell me.
All right.
I'm going to tell them
Restaurants
that.
in Toronto seem to get their oysters from the East Coast. Like,
Mostly, that's
was it Raspberry Point or Strawberry
Raspberry Point is a brilliant grower out of Prince Edward Island for sure. We have ones that I was showcasing today. Everyone was out of their mind for Barachois oysters from Rustico, and the salt on it was like a firecracker. East Cape is a great grower off East Coast. And you go into Nova Scotia, these are the areas that you don't normally hear about. You got to find them. Eel Lake is a wonderful oyster. Sober Island and Shandaff. Shandaff grows a beautiful oyster up near on the northern side of it. And great stuff. And then, of course, New Brunswick has got a lovely stuff. All the way up at the tippy top, Caracat oysters. And right down into, of course, the Beausoleils. I've got a lovely little Beausoleil right here with a large size to it. These guys have been growing, aquaculturing. Look at the shape of the top of the shell to the bottom is nice and round. So Beausoleils and French Kiss are wonderful. Newfoundland. Thank you, global warming. Newfoundland has oysters now. It's something, since you've been coming to Starfish, I've been like, where's the Newfoundland oysters? And it was something I was chasing for years. And then all of a sudden, I followed the right people, listened to what they were saying. And now, because of the global warming, the benefit is that they can grow oysters on a year-round basis. Mirachine Bay oysters coming out of Newfoundland, which is a good little one to look for as well.
I want to ask you about the contests.
Contest, sure.
Okay. What happens? Like, do a whole lot of people stand in front of a table with bags of oysters?
Yes. As my wife says, it's like watching paint dry. So to her, it's a little, because she's been doing it now, watching for like hundreds of years. A contest is basically, it comes from restaurant life. Customers want their oysters quick, but they also want them clean. So we got pushed into this world of restaurant style competition because there's a gallon shucking as well. So if you get oysters in a gallon or shucked, those shuckers are crazy. Like, I don't even get what they do. It's bonkers. But what we have to do is we have to open up an oyster. We have to take the two shells apart, sever the top part, get that shell gone, cut the bottom so it's loose, ready to go. And then a panel of judges will look at what I've done to that oyster. Because as you know, sharp knife into the hard shell, there's a very soft body of meat on the inside. It's very easy to nick, to cut, to throw in grit, and to do other things with it. So there's penalty points added to the time it takes for you to open the set number of oysters.
How did you feel
12.
the first time? The first time that you
First time in competition. This is back when I worked at Rodney's Oyster House back at the 209 Island, the OG. I've been there for 2 weeks. They go, and this is in August. They say, Patty, there's going to be a contest. You're going in this weekend. I go, I haven't even washed oysters. Like, I haven't even shucked not one. They go, well, you're going in because everybody does it. I'm like, all right. So I go and I do it. I came in 13th out of 14. One person disqualified. So I come in 13 out of 14, and the winner got a chance to go to PEI. So I go, wait a minute. So if you do good at this shucking thing, you can go to PEI. Yep. And if you do the good there, you can go to Ireland. I'm like, why Ireland? Well, that's where the World Championships is. I'm like, what? For doing this? I'm like, yeah. And that's sort of where I learned about it. But we all got very good at doing what we did because of the speed that we had to shuck oysters. You couldn't work a Friday night at Rodney's Oyster House until you graduated Mondays. Right, you can work the slower days and you graduate your way up until you get your technique so that you can come in and do much better. So that's sort of where contests come from, and it's something that a lot of people love to do. We're hosting one here tomorrow.
Oh,
where is here?
Well, I'm at Boston right now, and we're in it's the North America's Seafood Show Expo. So they have me come in and I host and MC and run the contest.
Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this. You mentioned global warming, but global warming is affecting the salinity in the waters around the world. So how is that? You mentioned that now there's oysters in Newfoundland, but what about in other places like in warmer waters?
So the alt is I don't know if you watched the weather the past 2 years. There's been cook-offs. There's been British Columbia and down through Washington and Oregon. There was a cook-off last year, and it's not in a good way. There were 120 degrees, 110 degrees. When the tide went out, everything got cooked. And down in the Gulf of Mexico, it's well over 100 every so often, and it does multiple different things. Bacteria count goes through the roof. It's too hot for the oysters, so the oysters do a die-off, and you lose a lot of product in that time frame. And let's say, Acme Oyster Bar in Louisiana, New Orleans, which is a classic that you should go and visit. Well, they can't get their local oysters. They couldn't get, so they're getting cold water oysters. So the good thing about that is the Canadian oysters are well known to be in cold water, so they can get them to the areas that need them in the times. But it's that you will get temperatures that are too hot for oystering. They can survive through it, but you lose your stock is what you're looking for in the stock and the volume of oysters that you're going to sell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so that did happen.
This is the water clarity and the temperature.
Yep.
All that's being affected.
Yep.
So we have these diploids are the filters, but at the same time, they're dying off because of the temperature and what they're having to filter.
Yeah, what would happen with the temperature is that they'd have a die-off, but then there's bacteria count that might go too high for human consumption. And there's other things called like red tide, which is a type of algae bloom that blooms up again in the warmer waters that the oysters can live through, but humans cannot consume. So therefore, there's times of years in the warmer body areas where you can't get oysters because they're not allowed to harvest. And you'll see that on Weather Network, even your red tide bloom this season, and then no oysters being harvested from this region. So we buy as a buyer, we just buy from regions that are open. And it's not to be, you don't have to be scared about it. Professional oyster groups know about this stuff and only buy in certain times. And more or less, if you're an oyster grower, you're not allowed to harvest. They test the water. The government tests the water first, and then they test the oyster before they ship out. So as a consumer, I would not be worried about these things. It's just something to know that why can't I get my favorite oyster right now? It's like, well, let's look at the seasonality of what's going on.
It is a fascinating subject, that's for sure.
So you're in Boston. Are you seeing anyone from Legal Seafoods?
There's one across the street from you right there, and they're wandering the trade show. So I'm doing a bunch of different things. I don't necessarily get a chance to go out to Legal, but I've been to a couple of them before, and we chat every so often over LinkedIn, with some people there.
Well, we are out of time. There's so much more we could talk about, but I really appreciate your time. I hope you have a wonderful time in Boston.
Thank you very much. Yes, you too. You too. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, I look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Anytime.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. Thanks, Sarah. Bye. Thanks, Adam.
Bye. That's a very interesting subject, oysters, from cuisine to environment.
Well, I like oysters. I usually just have 3 because when you're paying $4 for an oyster, 3 is plenty.
That's why you got to be someone's guest. No. Well, cheers to you, Mom.
And to you. Have a nice rest of the evening.
You too. Good night.